Thank you, everyone. This is my first camp, and I'm really excited to be here. So, this is Financing the Revolution. I'm really excited to tell you about some of the new developments that have been happening on the internet, and I'm really happy to be here. So, this is a Krugerrand. Who has seen one of these before? This is a Krugerrand. It's a 1-ounce gold coin from South Africa. It's worth a little over €1,000. Actually more these days, last couple of days. I got this because I signed a transaction and sent it into a peer-to-peer network. That's when I realized the world was changing. That's when I started working on this talk. I've given this talk a couple other times, most recently at the Technical University of Berlin, and before I gave it at Berlin Sides, B-Sides convention during the CCC last winter. My name is Jeffrey Paul. I'm an American. I live now in Berlin, and I've been doing this stuff for a long time. I had a nonprofit, Freenet, in 1999 called DataVibe, and now I run a consultancy called EEQJ. This is how you can get a hold of me. If you have any questions, I don't think we're going to have a lot of time for Q&A. I'll try to fit in what I can, but if you have any questions, please feel free to email me or contact me. It's my PGP key. Feel free to sign it. I'm an American. I earn dollars. I spend euros, so this is second nature to me. Most of the Bitcoin exchanges are denominated in dollars, so if you're not familiar, this is where we're at. I don't convert every single figure that we see. There are 4 parts to this talk. First, I want to explain why we need digital currencies. A lot of people think that they're a neat novelty, they're cool, but we actually really do, as a society, require these, and I'll tell you why. I'll go over what we have, or rather what we had before Bitcoin, and now what we have in Bitcoin, and why it solved the problems that we've had in the past. I'll talk about some applications that Bitcoin enables, and go over what you can do to help and get involved. The prerequisites for working with digital currencies are the same prerequisites of any secure computing system. We're talking about value here, actual real money. And so if your computer isn't secure, if your laptop gets stolen and the disk isn't encrypted, someone steals your private keys, they've stolen your money. If your network is being monitored, your privacy is compromised. If your software is backdoored or is escrowing your hard drive encryption keys, then government agencies can take your stuff. So make sure that you have a secure computing environment before you do anything here, because if there's a backdoor on your computer, then it doesn't much matter what you do with your key files. And make sure you review the code. That's a very important one. All this stuff is open source. Make sure you read it. For this explanation to work, I expect you to already have a rudimentary understanding of split key asymmetric crypto, basic use of the Tor anonymity software, and how totalitarian governments control their citizenry. These are important things going forward. First is, why bother? Why do we need alternative currencies? Why do we need digital currencies? And the base fact is that a free society cannot exist without a free market. If we don't have a free market, we cannot exercise our basic rights and our basic freedoms. Things like freedom of expression, free speech, free press, access to due process of law if you're accused of a crime, freedom of association and movement, talking to people, fellow revolutionaries, traveling around to go to computer security conventions, things like that, and the privacy to do so without the government knowing where you're going and who you're associating with. So there were some very famous American philosophers in the early 90s that pointed out that cash rules everything around me. Cream, get the money, dollar, dollar bill, y'all. And it really does boil down to that. I mean, I'm an American, it's kind of a capitalistic thing, but it's true. Without money, you can't really do much in the world. So if you want to exercise your basic rights, you need, for example, if you want to host a blog that says something the government doesn't like, you need to have hosting, you need to have distribution. You need to be able to have telephones to coordinate with the people in your organization. If you want to go the low-tech route, you need to have paper and a designer and printing, photocopiers. You have to ship flyers around. If you're accused of a crime, you want access to due process of law. It costs money. I have a friend of mine who was recently accused of a very serious federal crime in America, And he's prohibited from using a computer during the part of his defense, so he can't actually raise money to defend himself. And this is something that can happen to just about anyone. You need to travel around to meet with people and build a defense. You might get thrown in jail. I don't know how it works here, but in America, you need bail money to get out. To move around, you need to buy plane tickets. You need to buy train tickets. You need to have secure communications to coordinate with your fellow revolutionaries, or just weirdos in my case. You need to be able to buy prepaid phone cards and telephones with new IMEIs that you can throw away and things like that. You might need to pay for some forum hosting or email hosting that isn't Gmail that will just turn all your data over to the FBI with no warrant. This is a big problem. We're already seeing this. The government, at least my government, the United States government, is seizing people's domains, saying that everything's under their jurisdiction. If you can't pay another domain registrar because they've frozen your bank accounts, you can't publish. WikiLeaks ran into this problem. That's why they have a non-US controlled top-level domain, and this is some of their financial problems stem from things like this. We're now seeing that because of legislation like the Patriot Act in America, the US government, which is unfortunately where a large portion of the internet lives, the US government is tracking people's purchases with no warrants, just mass bulk data download. It's getting really bad. And so what we're seeing right now is people having to forfeit their assets before they even go to trial. A lot of cases with the DEA, things like that. You can't hire a lawyer if they've accused you of making money illegally. They take all your money away, and now you can't hire a lawyer to defend yourself. I mean, we're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. They're harassing people too. Obviously, WikiLeaks, they got shut off on Amazon Web Services. PayPal shut them down. MasterCard and Visa embargoed them. Post-Finance froze their account. There's another guy named Steve Bierfeld. He's an American. He's raising money at a political fundraiser, and he had a lockbox with about $4,000 in cash in it. And when he got to the airport, they locked him in a room for 4 hours and interrogated him. They said, "Where are you going? Why do you have this money? You're a drug dealer. We're going to arrest you." And I mean, that's not something that's illegal. They were just harassing him because he was carrying money. It happened to be a political rally. There were donations. And so these are becoming more and more of a big deal. Everybody knows about how evil these guys are. I mean, they'll freeze your accounts at the drop of a hat and you have basically no recourse. Everybody feels that banks are maybe one step up, but I mean, we're seeing things like this, where Bank of America's true colors are really coming out in the media. And banks, in my opinion, cannot be trusted because the government can exert pressure upon them to shut down activities that they don't like. And without funds, you can't operate. Everybody knows what happened with this guy. So, the New York Times, in a rare moment of clarity, pointed out, what would happen if a clutch of big banks decided that a particularly irksome blogger or other organization was too risky? What if they decided, one by one, to shut down financial access to a newspaper that was about to reveal irksome truths about their operations? This decision should not be left solely up to business as usual among the banks. They don't care about free speech. They care about profits. This is not a bad thing, but you have to protect yourself if you want to exercise your basic rights. So what do? I mean, we're up against a wall here. We have banks. They have all the money. They have all the payment systems, PayPal, et cetera. Like, you can't do anything. My solution, being an American, is a little bit different than what a lot of people I talk to feel. It's unfortunate, but most current governments don't agree with my ideas. So we need some sort of middle ground, something where we can preserve our right to be paid and make payments and spend money for things that we need to operate in a free society. The answer here comes in the form of a great quote from Mr. Jake Applebaum. Even though the government has a monopoly on violence, violence cannot solve math problems. Strong crypto is our saving grace. It's really, really great that in most parts of the first world, cryptography software is now properly recognized as free speech, freedom of expression. Like, we can write whatever crypto software we want. And we, for the first time in history, have the tools in place to exercise these rights without permission from the government. This is changing the world actively right now. What do we have? We have PGP. A lot of you know how to use PGP. I'm not going to go into it. It's a standard. It's not any one piece of software. A bunch of implementations. I'm seeing JavaScript ones in browsers. It's a really good tool. Off-the-record messaging, OTR. If you're not using this for your instant messages, you should be. The OpenSSL library, open source, anybody can build strong crypto software using really well-implemented crypto primitives. Well, maybe okay implemented. It's OpenSSL. And then we have Tor. We have anonymous access to websites, and more importantly, the most important thing about Tor is not so much anonymous access, but anonymous services, hidden services on Tor. So, using these tools, we can build digital cash systems, and people have. This has been done before. There are existing digital cash systems that have been around for a long time. Some of you have probably heard of Chaumian blinded tokens invented by David Chaum. It's a great idea, theoretically, but it never really took off. Here are the ones that were built into actual systems, and some of them are in operation today. One of the simplest ones is called PKTP, the Public Key Transaction Processor. Accounts are controlled by a simple RSA or other PGP key. An account is just a PGP key ID. It's a plain text interface. It's, you can sign a transaction, say transfer this money to this key ID, and everything is kept track of on the server. Very, very simple, but the problem is it's centralized, and there's a couple other issues. Is that the UI, I mean, you have to be a PGP user to begin with, and that's not really going to fly for most standard users of online payment systems. If you required every PayPal user to have a PGP key, it would just never work. So it's centralized. That's the big one. Centralized systems can be attacked, can be shut down. Tons of different ways to do that. I'll touch on a few of them. And then the big problem is because it's centralized, you have issues with bootstrapping. The way that PKTP works is that, that's the UI, by the way. The way that it works is that you have a certain amount of metal denominated in grams, and you can assign it to any other key ID in the system. And there's no registration of accounts. You just transfer it over to a key ID, and that key ID's got it. It never took off because you couldn't get metal unless you knew someone that was already using it that had metal. It was PGP, and that's the interface. I mean, just not going to happen. That's what the transactions look like. It's really simple. It's a great idea in theory, but it's not going to, you need the network effect here. You need people accepting it and using it before the currency actually has any value. One of the biggest ones is PEC Unix. Again, same system, centralized. They denominate in gold, grams of gold, just like PKTP. Another one that a lot of people are using is Liberty Reserve. Liberty Reserve is in the process of becoming less and less safe because I believe they're in Costa Rica, and the Costa Rican government is implementing all sorts of anti-money laundering laws, which is really just anti-anonymous transaction laws, mostly because of Liberty Reserve. It's quite popular. So what do? We need a system where we can actually buy things with anonymous digital currency. And so enter Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the best thing that we've seen so far. It's actually working. It's out there. It has a real market. It was invented by a guy by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto. Nobody's really sure if this is a pseudonym or an alias. He doesn't really have a lot of Google history. Published in, was it paper? Was it in March 2009? I don't know if it was a paper or the software, I forget. But they came out very close to the same time. It's a crypto commodity. It's not backed by anything. It is Bitcoin, and it is worth whatever people value Bitcoins at. Pseudonymous in that your accounts are tied to key IDs. And I don't know if any of you saw Dan Kaminsky's talk in the other room a couple hours ago, but he points out that it is possible to correlate certain flows of Bitcoin transactions. So it's not fully anonymous. You can't really depend on it to be, but there are some steps that you can take to protect yourself. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go into them, but it is possible to be relatively untraceable with Bitcoin, even though it's not fully anonymous. It's peer-to-peer, it's fully decentralized. There's no central single point of failure with Bitcoin. You cannot shut it down by rating 1, 10, 50, or 100 servers in 100 countries. You'd have to shut down everyone using it. It has a controlled inflation up to a certain point, and then it stops, which is a great thing in my opinion. One of the things it does is it spawns adoption of the system. It has compiled the releases out for Linux, Mac, and Windows. It's open source. You can grab it. It's graphical interface and a command line one. It's described very thoroughly in a paper called Bitcoin.pdf on the website. It's PDF, grab it, read it. It's a quick read, and it explains pretty much beginning to end exactly the technical workings of Bitcoin. I'll touch on a few of them. This is the Windows interface to Bitcoin. This is the command line interface to Bitcoin. It uses JSON RPC, so it's very easy to script and build into other things. Now, I have to point something out to you here. I'm going to tell you a bunch of different things about Bitcoin, and how they all fit together isn't necessarily going to make sense at first. Try to stick with me. I'll do my best. Dan Kaminsky, who was talking about Bitcoin in the other room a couple hours ago, he's pointed out on Twitter maybe 2-3 months ago, first 3 times you think you understand Bitcoin, you're wrong. There's a lot of ins, a lot of outs, a lot of what have yous, and you gotta keep it all in your head to fully understand how it works. As I mentioned, I first gave this talk at the Berlin Sides Conference in December. A lot of things have changed then, and a lot of the things I'm going to tell you about Bitcoin, I'm going to emphasize the difference from December to now. Not even a full year, just huge, huge changes in the Bitcoin world. Back then, Bitcoin was worth about a US quarter. And that's not the case anymore. Now it's worth €8. It's really seen explosive growth, explosive demand. And the inflation is constant no matter how many people use Bitcoin. I'll explain how in a moment. Bitcoin's implemented to C++. It uses the OpenSSL library for elliptic curve keys. It doesn't build cleanly on Red Hat or CentOS because elliptic curve cryptography is patented and they don't include it. But you can build on a bunch of other distros or build your own OpenSSL with that stuff. It does not use encryption. It only uses signing. The beginning, middle, and end of Bitcoin is signing transactions. That's the only place crypto is used in the whole thing. I use the Boost libraries for C++, WX widgets for the GUI, and Berkeley DB for on-disk storage. It has some cool features. You can receive payments while you're offline, because when someone sends you a Bitcoin payment, they're actually signing a transfer order and sending it into the peer-to-peer network. They can sign that transfer order to your key, your public key, and never communicate directly with your computer for that transaction to work. Bitcoin address is a base 58 encoding of your public key's hash, plus the version number of Bitcoin and a checksum so that you don't type it in. If you assign keys to someone else, or if you assign a Bitcoins to some key that doesn't exist, that's why the checksum is there, they're unrecoverable without brute forcing that private key. Not likely. It supports SOX proxying, which is good because you can run it over Tor. There are other security issues, as have been pointed out numerous times, in the anonymity of Tor, as well as the Bitcoin network itself. But fortunately, the Bitcoin network is getting much, much larger. And so the Bitcoin-related issues are becoming smaller. Excuse me. All of the transactions for Bitcoin are distributed to the entire peer-to-peer network in a broadcast fashion. The peer-to-peer network itself is fairly simple. It doesn't inflate beyond 21 million coins. There's a controlled inflation system to distribute Bitcoins into the network at regular intervals, no matter how many people operate on the network, and uses a negative feedback system. So the faster the Bitcoins are found, the harder it is to find them. And so the inflation approaches a fixed rate, and it gets cut in half every period of time. And so what that means is that eventually, like an asymptote, you don't get any more Bitcoins after a certain point. 21 million is the cap, and it's actually not 21 million. It's something infinitesimally below that. There are no chargebacks with Bitcoin. When you sign a transaction and send it into the network, those coins are no longer yours. If you want those coins back, you have to have someone make another transaction with another key and send them back to you, unlike traditional payment systems, and fortunately, very much like cash payment systems. If I take a coin and I hand it to someone and they leave, I can't get that coin back. But Anyone who's been on the receiving end of a MasterCard or Visa chargeback knows that that's not always the case. I might also add, that's one of the reasons that people don't sell Bitcoins for credit cards or PayPal or things like that in general, because you could get the coins and then charge it back and get your money back too. The controlled inflation is cool because there's no central issuing authority. It happens completely based on the protocol built into the Bitcoin software code that everyone runs. The blockchain is a cryptographically assured history, a distributed timestamping mechanism for all of the Bitcoin transactions that have occurred in the past, to keep track of who owns what and to prevent double spends. And the people who contribute to the blockchain by performing cryptographic proof of works receive the inflation coins at predictable intervals. And as I said before, every 210,000 blocks, the per block reward is cut in half. So eventually, the per block reward will reach 0. Maximum coins in circulation, just under 21 million. So a lot of people talk about Bitcoin. They say, well, this is just a way to get money from using electricity, and it doesn't quite work that way. The inflation was necessary to the functioning of Bitcoin in the beginning to spur adoption of Bitcoin among people, to get coins into the hands of people who will use them, and to encourage more people to use the software. However, now it's not really that important. Like, we have enough Bitcoins right now because they're divisible to 8 decimal places. If never another Bitcoin was generated, which is extremely unlikely and basically improbable, that we would have enough Bitcoins now. We could just use bit cents or millibitcoins, or they're divisible very small. To do these proof of works, to find these hash values, I'll explain more in a moment, you need to be able to do SHA-256 very, very fast. As I explained before, the more blocks that are solved, there's a negative feedback system, so it gets harder to solve subsequent blocks the faster the blocks are solved. And so it's already beyond the range of using a general purpose CPU. Don't think that you can just download Bitcoin and hit a button and generate money. It doesn't really work like that. Your electricity will cost more. People are using GPUs and other custom-made ASICs and things like that. There have been some work in FPGAs, just things to do millions or billions of SHA-256 tries with the lowest cost per watt. This is the inflation curve right now. This is where we're at. There's just over 7 million Bitcoins in existence. And we're not even halfway there. Like, we still have tons and tons of Bitcoins that are going to be generated in the life of the network. The blockchain is the core of Bitcoin. It contains a list of every single transaction that has ever occurred in the Bitcoin network. And they're bundled up into things called blocks. And these blocks are archived. Every single peer-to-peer node on the network, the first thing it does is it downloads the existing blockchain. Any new blocks that come out are broadcast through the peer-to-peer network, and people incorporate them. So it's always growing. The archive of previous blocks is validated by every single individual on the Bitcoin network, because each block has a hash of that block, and that hash needs to be below a certain value. Specifically, it needs to have a certain number of leading zeros. That value changes. The blocks have a nonce in them, short for number used once, and this nonce is irrelevant to the actual functioning of Bitcoin. However, with a given nonce, in a given block, when you hash that, you're going to get leading zeros. Obviously, if you have two different nonces, you hash both of them, it's possible that you're going to come out with two different hashes that one has a leading zero and one does not. Well, if you logically conclude that, you see that the more leading zeros are required, the more nonces you have to check to be able to get that. And that's how Bitcoin slows down the distribution of new coins based on how many people, the aggregate hash speed of the network is, quote, solving these blocks. Each block, in addition to a couple other things, contains the hash of the previous block. It's a chain. Each block has its transactions in it. It's actually a Merkle hash tree over the transactions. The block header is a fixed size. And it has the previous block's hash in it. It has I think it has the timestamp in it as well. Altering the global transaction record, like if you want to change the last 4 or 5 blocks, you don't have to just solve the block 4 or 5 back, because the longest blockchain is the one that's accepted. So if you wanted to alter a transaction in the past that wasn't very, very recent, you would have to alter that block, and then you would have to solve all of the blocks after it with the previous block hashes in them. And so it becomes exponentially harder to alter the Bitcoin blockchain the more correct blocks are piled on top of it. The blockchain is necessarily public to prevent double spending of coins. Because there's no central authority to say who has what coins, you have to keep the blockchain public. Each block is validated by its own hash. You hash the block, it has a nonce in it that was discovered by someone out there. And if it hashes to the correct number, and the resultant hash is the correct number of leading zeros, and it has the hash of the previous block in it, you know that one's good. It allows for really neat research. The fact that the blockchain is public, it means that you can go and download the entire blockchain. In fact, that's the very first thing the Bitcoin client does. And you can dig into it, look at every single transaction, every single public key, every single bit of data the Bitcoin network's ever seen. It's really cool. There's some interesting hacks that I'm not going to go into, but one of the most useful sites is a site called Block Explorer. It's written by this guy by the name of Thamos, and he did a really, really good job. You can click through it. It correlates all of the different data from blocks and transactions. The Bitcoin hashing algorithm is SHA-256, so whatever can do SHA-256 quickly, and we're seeing things like graphics cards, GPUs, application-specific integrated circuits, ASICs, that have been made specifically for solving Bitcoin blocks. People have implemented FPGAs. This whole blockchain goes back to a trust anchor. The hash of block 0, it's called the Genesis block, is hard-coded in the Bitcoin source code. And the Bitcoin developers now have taken it upon themselves to checkpoint the block hash and include a couple additional block checksums past that one. Not quite recent ones or new ones, but every large chunk they put another one in there, just for safety. The block structure contains the block hash, which is calculated initially by the person who solved the block to determine that the nonce is correct. Although every single person who receives a block calculates the hash to verify that it is in fact valid. As the nonce, this is the big part of it. You have to find the correct nonce that causes the hash to be underneath the hash target with the correct number of leading zeros. It's the previous block hash because it's a chain. It has what's called the difficulty. The difficulty is the inverse of the target. As the target gets lower and requires a larger number of leading zeros, the difficulty goes up. It has a timestamp of when the block was solved, and then it has the Merkle root hash of a Merkle tree that covers all the different transactions. This is to keep the block headers small. And then after the block header, but still in the block, is a list of all the transactions that make up that block. Coolest thing about Bitcoin, to make the inflation system work, it has to be able to control the feedback mechanism so that if 100 times more people are mining for Bitcoins trying to solve these blocks, that it's not giving out 100 times more coins. And what it does this by every certain number of blocks, and it's 2016 blocks, the hash target, the number that the hash of blocks needs to be below going forward, is recalculated by everyone in the network. And it does this based on how long the previous 2016 blocks took. And if a block is supposed to take 10 minutes with zero network growth, and then 2016 blocks is about 2 weeks, you have this 2-week period. At the end of the 2-week period, we say, well, we didn't take 2 weeks to do all of this. We took 3 days. The difficulty is, rather the target and difficulty are the same thing, one is just the inverse. The target is then moved down to make the limbo bar lower to make it more difficult to find the correct nonce. This is an idea that I first saw implemented in something called hash cache, where you're looking for partial hash collisions as a proof of work. And I think it's a really great part of the Bitcoin system. Blocks is supposed to take about 10 minutes, and the network has this hard-coded, and depending on how far off they are from that 2-week period after the 2016 blocks, moves it up or down. So what this chart is the negative delta from the expected time that a 2016 block chunk is supposed to take. And this right here is the difficulty. So you can see, and I got to point out right here, the second line from the bottom is 0%. This would be no network growth. There's only one sample here, this one right here, that is below that, and that's where the actual aggregate mining speed of the Bitcoin network got slower. Rather, it didn't get slower, it was slower than expected based on the previous retargeting. Almost all of this is up, 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 up. I have to point out that the difficulty here, the inverse of the target, is a log scale. That's an exponential scale. It's very important to note. So what you can see here is that up here, a 2016 block set, what didn't take 14 days, it took 3 days and 8 hours. It was quite possibly the largest spike in Bitcoin block solving power in the network. And you'll see that it actually went from here to here. Huge spike in difficulty. And the next, people were still out there buying video cards, building mining rigs, all this kind of stuff to get their block solving reward. And even the next one, it was over 24% faster than, like it didn't compensate enough because it only looks at the previous 14 days, or I'm sorry, the previous 2016 blocks. This case is only the previous 3.5 days. This is what the scale looks like on a linear scale. It's really a big deal. Like, it really does take this much more hashing to solve a block than it did in the middle of, not even middle, earlier last year. This is 2010. This is before this year. Now, shit's about to get real. The very last bar on this chart is the end of 2010. That's the first bar on the next chart, which is the 2011 chart. Bitcoin mining has become a really huge thing, and people are dedicating tons and tons of effort and time to it because at least when difficulties were like this, you could invest a little bit of money in hardware. I bought a $600 video card. I ran it for 4 or 5 days. I took the Bitcoins I generated, I mailed it to somebody, he sent me a €1,000 gold coin. It's a big deal. It's not like that anymore. Now it's approaching the cost of electricity that you need to use to run the video cards. So this is up until the beginning of July of this year. And you can see it's still, because the zero line is right here, you can see it's still, for the most part, going up. Network is still increasing in hash rate. This is a website called Bitcoin Watch. This is a very old screenshot. I left it in here specifically to show what it was like months and months ago. At the time, there were under 5 million Bitcoins. Bitcoins were trading for a very small amount of money, about a quarter in US dollars. This is what it looked like then. There were 99,000 blocks, there's 5 million coins, and they're only worth about $1.5 million or €1 million. It's not the case anymore. Now, this is this morning, we now have 140,000 blocks, and you can't actually say that, you couldn't have predicted that we'd have that many blocks today previously because they don't take 10 minutes. Because of the growth of the network, because more people are trying to solve them, they actually get solved faster than that. And the number of Bitcoins in the world is now over 7 million. And the markets have exploded. The demand for Bitcoin has gone up. The prices of Bitcoin have gone up. And now it's a $68 million market. It's almost 50 million euro. As I said before, a lot of people are into mining for Bitcoins. It's still mildly profitable. It takes a long time to recoup your investment now, not like it was before. Don't even bother using your CPU. It's a waste of time and electricity. There's an OpenCL-based Python miner out there. You can use it to target any OpenCL video card. The ATI ones work best. Difficulty is going to continue to go up. There are a lot of people who are into this. If you buy a video card today, it generates X number of Bitcoins per day. That's only going to go down as more people are into that. There are some people really dedicated to doing this. And not just one or two. This is a really big deal. Bitcoin has some shortcomings. It's not perfect. It just happens to solve the problems that kept all the other systems from taking off, namely that it's decentralized and that it's possible to be bootstrapped. We need to pause for about 2 seconds. Could you restart the video there, please? Good? Thank you. So the shortcomings that Bitcoin has aren't showstoppers, but they are important, and I want you to know about them. The current bootstrap protocol, when you first launch Bitcoin, now when you're on the network already, it does peer exchange, but the very first time you launch it, it needs to get some peers to exchange peers with. It uses an IRC network. It looks just like botnet command and control. It's probably the least well thought out part of Bitcoin, but hey, it works, and it hasn't broken yet. It looks to intrusion detection systems like botnet command and control. The port number for Bitcoin is hard-coded. It's very easy to filter. However, good thing here, it doesn't always have to be. The actual Bitcoin on the wire protocol, when it does peer exchange, has a field in there for port number. So even though Bitcoin is always on one port right now, very soon that won't be the case. The peer exchange messages can specify alternate ports. So as soon as it's implemented in the client, the protocol doesn't actually have to change. And I think it might even be that existing clients will connect to the new ports. They just won't use different ports themselves for inbound ones. There's space in that protocol field for 128-bit IPv6 addresses. It is future-proof. It's good. When IPv6 is more commonplace, you can run Bitcoin on a zillion different addresses, on a zillion different ports. You're going to actually have to do deep packet inspection to say, hey, that's Bitcoin. All transactions are public forever. This is a necessary part of Bitcoin. And without it, Bitcoin wouldn't work. It's pseudonymous, as I explained before. You can do traffic and pattern analysis. There are lots of tools coming out to do exactly that. However, you have some measure of plausible deniability. There are already Bitcoin services where you can send your coins in and get different coins back at random intervals to different addresses. If Mallory sends coins to some unknown party and tries to make an anonymous purchase, and then that same anonymous purchaser, or rather, same anonymous retailer, takes those coins and then later shops at Mallory's web shop and pays for something that they're having shipped to their house with their name on it. Now, the original source of those coins is known. This is a way of cross-correlating different transactions. It is a problem, and there's research being done to decouple the keys that you receive incoming transactions on when you then make an outgoing transaction, because the outgoing transaction takes coins from multiple keys. So when you send a transaction, it connects incoming key addresses that weren't previously associated in the network. There's some really cool work being done to minimize that effect. It's relatively new code base, more so 6 months ago. It's getting much, much better now. It's in active development. It's on GitHub. Anybody can send pull requests. There's 4 or 5 people that review them. There's a bug tracker. It's in active development, and patches are not just thrown out of hand. Anybody can jump in, say, hey, that could be better. I think there are probably some serious bugs to be found, but I don't think any of them are showstoppers. They're implementation bugs in the software. They're not going to be things that stop the Bitcoin network. When I wrote this, the Bitcoin network was very small. It was maybe 500, 600 people on the peer-to-peer network. You can't hide in something like that. If you launch another couple hundred nodes, you're going to end up with someone who knows exactly what's going on in the network. These days, the network is much, much larger. And so this isn't really the case. There are lots of transactions and lots of nodes. These are the counts of Bitcoin transactions per month for 09, 010, and the first part of this year. As you can see, this is not volume. This is just counts of transactions. This is whether people send a penny or 10,000 Bitcoins. This is transaction count, number of transactions being handled by the network, being incorporated in the blockchain. As you can see, lots of people are using Bitcoins for a lot of different things. This is the daily transaction count leading up to yesterday from the first of the year. There's been a little bit of fluctuation. Interest in Bitcoin has waned just a little bit. Is it possible to move the projector over just a little bit so we can get the far left numbers there? Or is that a... No? Okay. That top number is 15,000. About halfway down, we got 7,500. So we're seeing Bitcoin, on big days, we're seeing Bitcoin transactions exceed 13,500. Like, there's a lot of transactions going on every single day. There's a website called Mt. Gox. Long time ago, it was Magic the Gathering Online Exchange. It was this website for trading Magic the Gathering cards. And now it's the world's largest Bitcoin exchange. They pivoted, and now they're buying and selling Bitcoins. They got hacked a while ago and didn't seem to actually learn a lot from that hack. There's no way you can move that over a little bit to get the left-hand edge on the... Oh, okay. Well, the top line there is $30. At one point, Bitcoins approached $30 US. For a long, long time, they were under $1. These days, Bitcoins are hovering around $10. They've lost some value lately because not as many people are super, super excited about them. But as you can see, the transaction counts are going up. So they are gaining traction. And this is actually a good thing because, as anyone can see here, this huge spike, Bitcoins are not worth $30. The market doesn't sustain that. This is a bubble. But what you're seeing now is vast increases in the number of bid and ask offers on the exchanges, and vast increases in the number of Bitcoin transactions occurring, which means that the price is actually stabilizing. We're finding some level of equilibrium here. It was absolutely nuts here as the network worked itself out, but we've been in the $9 to $14 range. Ah, perfect. Go hackers. We've been in the $9 to $14 range for over a month. Bitcoin has never been that stable, so it's a really good thing. This right here is this year's network transaction volume, not count of transactions, but the actual number of Bitcoins that have been traded on a daily basis between Bitcoin users in the peer-to-peer network in 2011. We're seeing huge amounts of huge transaction counts, and some of these transactions contain a substantial amount of Bitcoins. We're dealing with really big market now, and it's really astounding to me to see that it's taken off so quickly. This is the combination of the last two charts. If you look at the average daily price from the Mt. Gox exchange, which is the biggest one, and you combine that with the number of Bitcoins that are being sent, obviously it's a market. If you were to take the number of Bitcoins being sent every day and dump it on the exchange, the price would drop. But if you just do simple math and say, this is what people are feeling Bitcoins are worth right now, and this is what the Bitcoin network is pushing, then you can see that Bitcoins have had $150 million days. In one day, the Bitcoin network has moved $150 million worth of Bitcoins. This is something that no one was using at the beginning of the year. This is a big deal. And with all this attention and with all this money, a lot more eyeballs have been looking at the code. A lot more eyeballs have been auditing the code. There have been bugs found, but none of them have been showstoppers. And Bitcoin is here to stay. More telling, this next one is not my chart. I can't find higher res version of this, and I don't have the data to plot it myself because I haven't been sitting in the IRC channel. But the number of people on the Bitcoin peer-to-peer network has been going up steadily. When it started, it was a couple hundred. When it started, it was a couple hundred. It settled maybe around 3,000 or 5,000 for a long time. Nowadays, it's common to see 40,000 people. That's not okay. Nowadays, it's common to see over 30,000, 40,000 people on the Bitcoin peer-to-peer network. This is some more recent data, zoomed in a little bit higher res. I'm going to try to get this historical data and make some better charts. They'll be on my website once I have it. Possible failure modes for Bitcoin. Anyone investing time, money, effort, value into something like Bitcoin is going to say, well, what can go wrong? With cash in your hand, with a gold coin sitting in your house, you know what can go wrong. You can lose it. Someone can break into your house and steal it. You could drop it in the ocean. But with Bitcoin, there's a lot more stuff going on here. So you could DDoS the P2P broadcast network. You send out a bunch of bogus messages. They would mostly be ignored. You could DDoS the actual IP addresses of the people participating in the peer-to-peer network. There's over 40,000 of them on a regular basis now. It's basically infeasible, although not impossible. You could DDoS the Bootstrap IRC server, where they first connect to get a couple nodes to connect to do peer exchange with those nodes. Only works for people who are joining Bitcoin, opening the Bitcoin client for the very first time, because the client caches the node list that it had before. So the next time you open Bitcoin, it does connect to IRC, but it doesn't have to. It's still got old nodes that it was talking to before. It keeps track of all these with a timestamp, so it knows which ones it's talked to most recently. You could raid and shut down the Bootstrap IRC server. Same thing, basically. All the existing Bitcoin participants would still work. People would get to passing around base node addresses by IP addresses, kind of like they did with Nutella 10 years ago. Once you get connect to one, you do peer exchange, you get the whole network. A malicious attacker could obtain a network hash rate majority and take over solving of the blocks, which would allow them to not include the pending transactions in those future blocks. And it would allow him to double spend his own coins, but only for the duration of this attack. The moment he stopped, the network would make its own legitimate blockchain, which is longer than his, and his blockchain would be abandoned. And as the aggregate hash rate of the network grows, this becomes a harder and harder attack. Way down at the bottom of the list, if there's a major weakness discovered in elliptic curve signatures or the SHA hashing algorithm, then we have some big problems. But it's my understanding that the Bitcoin software can use other hashing systems, like it could be patched and other hashing systems could be dropped in. At the moment, this is very low priority stuff, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. The CIA said, well, we can't have this. This is going to destabilize governments. They could patch their clients to ignore the transactions of others and just solve blocks really, really fast because they have tons of computing power. It would deny service to people trying to get their blocks or their transactions included in blocks. But this only works until the attack stops, because the very next legitimate block that's solved, and by the way, their blocks would be legitimate too, just transaction free. The very next block solved by a good actor in the system would include all those pending transactions. So it's not really like it's a temporary denial of service, requires a ton of work, and its effects stop the moment it stops. It's kind of like a website DDoS. The other thing they could do is just use the vanilla client, cooperate in the network if they have all this network power, solve a bunch of blocks, and keep their Bitcoins, use those Bitcoins for, CIA operations, whatever they want to do. You can sell the coins at a big profit because if you're not paying for your electricity, or like if the taxpayers are, or if you're doing some sort of botnet kind of thing, then the coins are all profit. Future Bitcoin. I thought that we would see botnets used for generation. I tried to get some people who ran botnets to play along. Didn't really happen, couldn't find them. Apparently people who are exposed to criminal liability in 200 plus countries don't really pop their heads up and say, hi, hire me. Seemed inevitable. We've already seen it. The next slide I'll show you. There's competing systems. People have already forked Bitcoin. It doesn't do anything to the Bitcoin network itself. They set up their own blockchains, and they can have their own alternative currency, like Bitcoin 2 or IX coin, I think is one of them. It's only as good as people who are using it. Bitcoin has the traction. Bitcoin is the one. Bitcoin is what everybody's on board with. Anybody can use this to set up their own decentralized peer-to-peer currency, but it's not going to have any benefit unless people use it. You can modify the Bitcoin software itself and have a blockchain fork. However, the coins in this alternate blockchain would be ignored by the unmodified Bitcoin clients, and your blockchain would be of limited usefulness. I think the big thing that's going to happen is that Bitcoins are going to be used as a backing value. People are going to trade them indirectly. Just like when you send a PayPal payment from user A to user B, that doesn't hit the banking networks. All that is rows in PayPal's database saying that user A doesn't have it and user B does now. And that's how I think Bitcoin's going to work. This is an article about Bitcoin mining malware that was spotted in the wild June 29th of this year. It's really a thing now. So, really quickly, I got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to go a little bit faster. Putting it all together, what can we do now that we have this? Well, the very first thing you need is Tor. Not that Tor. That Tor. You need to set up a Tor hidden service. Bitcoin, just explained, and you need the post. Once you have the post, you can do anonymous retailing. This has never before been possible in the history of mankind, to sell things without the buyer knowing who, where, or what you are. You can set up a website that anybody can go to, can be hosted anywhere. No one can figure out where it is unless there's some major vulnerability in Tor. And there's research into that, so protect yourself accordingly. You can deliver anonymously. If someone buys something from you, you can put on rubber gloves and buy stamps for cash so there are no fingerprints, and drop it in a mailbox with no return address and no one knows where it came from. And you can, the missing piece of the puzzle is you can accept payments via Bitcoin, because you can generate a Bitcoin address, people can pay you, and they don't need to know where or who you are. This has been done. I predicted this in December. In February, someone set up a website selling illicit drugs on a Tor hidden service, and they accept Bitcoin, and it created a pretty big splash, got a lot of media attention. Senators immediately freaked out, said, we got to shut this down, this can't go on. And it remains to be seen. At the moment, it's still up, it's still working, so we'll see what happens with all that. If you have the Bitcoins, what do you do with them? Mt. Gox, the largest Bitcoin exchange, they got hacked. They don't know how to salt their passwords. They don't know how to secure the database. They don't know how to avoid XSS. It's a very poorly run service. Avoid it at all costs, but it is the big one, and you can go there and see who's selling Bitcoins and for how much. TradeHill's a new exchange. I haven't used them. Can't recommend them one way or the other. There are online gambling sites that you can use Bitcoin to play at, and when you win, you get Bitcoins and you withdraw them. It works just like any other site, but with Bitcoin in and out. This website is called Bidding Pond. It's like an eBay. You can buy like RAM and stuff like that for Bitcoins. You can list stuff if you want to get Bitcoins. The page called Trade on the Bitcoin Wiki shows all sorts of stuff you can buy, tons and tons of things. And you can buy alpaca socks if you want. That was one of the very first ones up there. But if you want some Bitcoins, think up a business, think up something you want to sell, consult, whatever, put it up here and sell it and have people pay you in Bitcoins. There's an over-the-counter exchange for Bitcoins. It's Bitcoin OTC on Freenode. Used to be small, but now it's full of a lot of people. This is a way of not dealing with any exchange. Just go into the channel and talk to people. There's an online web of trust system for determining if people are scammers or not, kind of like eBay's feedback. There's a new one coming out called CoinPurse, which I'm building. I'll tell you about in a minute. This is the order book for the Bitcoin OTC exchange on Freenode. You can see that people are selling things like WoW subscriptions, game cards, eBay money, Google Plus invites. You can buy all sorts of stuff. You can buy prepaid debit cards. You can buy Amazon gift cards. Like just about anything you want. In fact, I saw on Craigslist a few months ago someone is renting a loft in San Francisco, and they will accept their rent in bitcoins. There's a lot of stuff you can actually spend bitcoins on. They are a real currency now. This is Bitcoin Watch. As of this morning, we now have 7 million bitcoins, and with this market cap, these are some prices on different exchanges. You can exchange Linden dollars for them if you want, all sorts of stuff. This is a very good website if you just want some Bitcoin data at a glance. Call to action. Use Bitcoin. Download it, check it out, buy a couple of Bitcoins from your friends, trade them around, use them to cover small micropayments with you and your friends. It's a really cool thing. Find bugs, report them. Spread the word. Tell your friends about Bitcoin. Tell your parents about Bitcoin. Tell people who would never, ever know about something like this. Really tell them. Get into the source code, improve the tools. If nothing else, file bugs. The more attention there is to the bug tracker, the more work that's going to be done on the ones that are important. Build new apps around Bitcoin. A lot of people are doing this. Build gambling sites, build poker rooms, build shopping carts, build exchanges, build whatever you want, but build something. Do something with it that makes the Bitcoin ecosystem better. And think about all of this. Think about the possibilities. You really can change the world now that we have these tools. CoinPurse is my project. It's public beta will be opening very soon. What it is, it's a server-hosted Bitcoin wallet and account. It's non-anonymous. It connects to Facebook, Twitter, things like that. Lets you know how to buy and sell Bitcoins among your social graph, your friends of friends. If you know a guy who knows a guy who's selling Bitcoins, you don't have to deal with an exchange or credit cards or PayPal. You can just meet up, and it makes it very easy to send payments between you and your friends. I have to express a lot of thanks and gratitude to the people who have made this talk possible. This data coming out of the blockchain and the tools that we have to analyze Bitcoin. The biggest one is Michael Marquardt. His name is Thamos, and he runs Bitcoin Block Explorer. It's one of the oldest blockchain analysis tools. Definitely check it out. And Mizra Adiria, he runs a site called Witcoin, and before that he had a site called Nullvoid, had a lot of really useful Bitcoin statistics and stuff like that. Jeff Garzik is and Blue Matt are some of the main Bitcoin developers these days. And Artfors is a German guy who I think he might have been the first person to build an ASIC mining rig. Really, really dedicated people. That's my PGP key, and that's the QR. If you want to get out your phones, grab it. Sign it. It's got my email address on it. I'd appreciate PGP signatures. That's it. Thank you. We have probably about 5 or 7 minutes for Q&A if anybody has any questions.
Right. Give Jeff a warm applause. Thank you very much. I'm sure there's enough grounds for a discussion. If you have any questions, please line up at the microphone right there. First, we do have a question from the mighty internet, from the people watching the streams.
Talk fast. We got 7 minutes, and
yeah, please keep it short.
People.
One of the questions on IRC
Speak right into the microphone, please.
Yeah. Are there known cases of governmental tracking of Bitcoin payments? How about governmental actions against Bitcoin up till now?
There's no way of knowing if the government is tracking Bitcoin because the blockchain is downloaded to every single Bitcoin user. When you fire up the Bitcoin client, you get the whole blockchain. You can write, there's already Python out there on GitHub that'll let you analyze it. So there's absolutely no way of knowing that. Jeff Garzik, one of the Bitcoin developers, was actually invited to give a talk on Bitcoin to the CIA at Langley. They flew him out and he gave a quick presentation, so they know about it. It's on the radar. Nobody's gone so far as outlawed yet, but who knows what's going to happen.
The room?
Okay. Have you watched the previous panel from Kaminsky where...
I'm sorry.
have you been in the other panel where Kaminsky explained how you can map the majority or almost all transactions done via Bitcoin?
You can map them to identities, is that what you said?
You can map them, well, not to real identities, but if you can map exactly like this ID, perform these transactions with this set of IDs, it would give you quite a good indication.
When you make a Bitcoin payment, it correlates Bitcoin source addresses together because it has to take coins from different keys. So let's say you have one coin, you want to make a payment of 3, it has to connect all of those in the transaction. And so when you make a Bitcoin payment, that's when the anonymity is compromised. But it is possible to, there are patches coming out now for the client to select which of these invisible, or rather to have a finer grained control over which of these individual keys send the payments. And we're going to see a lot of work in the future about increasing the anonymity properties of Bitcoin. As it is right now, there are already a couple of services where you can mix it up and get different coins in exchange. So.
Okay, another question from the Flow Control Angel.
Yeah, Sven G on IRC was asking, where are the tools to carry Bitcoins around and exchange them other than laptops with 3G connection to the internet? How do normal people use Bitcoins on the street and in the shops?
CoinPurse, which is an app I'm developing, as well as there are a few other apps, can function, like they function as web apps on smartphones. They're built, for WebKit integration, and it's very easy if you're not doing the actual Bitcoin peer-to-peer on your local machine. If you trust a hosted wallet for small amounts of money, it's very easy to it's kind of like making a bank-to-bank transfer inside of your bank or making a PayPal payment. You don't need to do the PayPal processing network on your phone to do that. You just need to send a command to a service that you trust. This doesn't mean that they have to hold all of your Bitcoins, and it doesn't mean that you have to leave your Bitcoins there all the time. It's just a convenience factor. Bitcoin is still completely decentralized. You can just take your coins out and take your ball and go home. So.
Another question in the room?
Yeah, the market for an online market is okay, but compared to the real world, it is still a small market. Do you see, or are there any evidence that there are real market traders who try to influence that system because they have the money to buy a lot of Bitcoins and do this manipulations?
That was definitely the case in the first couple years of Bitcoin. We're already seeing now. There's a website now that will show you the actual depth of the market and how much money it would take in real dollars or real Bitcoins to move the market one way or the other. And because the depth of the order books in these markets, the number of bids, the number of asks have gone up so dramatically that whereas before you could move the price of Bitcoin by a few bucks with maybe under $20,000 US, now you're talking, at least that just to move it a fraction of a dollar. Like the markets are getting much larger. They were very unstable to begin with for exactly that reason. And as more and more people are involved in the markets, it slows down and stabilizes. And we're seeing that now. It's a very good thing for the Bitcoin economy.
The second to last question is from a watcher of the streams.
Yeah, the next question from IRC is a double feature, more or less.
I'm sorry, can you speak into the mic, please?
Yeah. Since you suppose Bitcoin is a way to finance the revolution, I see the need for strong anonymity considering money transfers. There are mixing services out there, but I'm unsure how hard they make it for law enforcement to analyze the blockchain.
For law enforcement to what?
To analyze the blockchain.
Yeah, it's not difficult for anyone to analyze the blockchain. The difficulty lies in correlating keys to individuals. And there's always going to be a strong level of plausible deniability there. And if you use care, specifically when receiving and sending transactions, and if you use Bitcoin mixing services to ensure that you're not sending the same coins that you've received, then you can protect yourself. And I know a lot of people right now that are using Bitcoin on a fairly large scale to do things that many governments would take quite an issue with. And so far, they've been relatively safe. I don't know if this is because the protections they've been taking or just the lack of interest on the part of the government. But I think it's anonymous enough, or rather pseudonymous enough, that it's going to actually work for our purposes. It's far better than anything else we could use.
Another question from a member of the audience.
I don't really have a question, just more like a comment. Thanks for the interesting talk. We have set up a Bitcoin sofa in the hardware hacking tent, and we're actually selling and buying Bitcoin for $1 and euros. So if you want to take some live action tonight.
I would love to do that. I would love to come. I will be selling gold and silver coins as well for Bitcoin and dollars and euros. So
No, not only you, but the whole
Yeah.
audience. And
Yeah,
I also have
anybody wants to
some
come.
Bitcoin fan T-shirts if you want to
yeah,
buy some.
I'd like to talk to you after. We'll figure it out. So anybody who wants to do that, come on up. We'll talk about it.
We have another half of the question right there on the screen.
Yeah, that's the second part of the double feature.
Into the mic, please.
Yeah. Also, what do you think about the blind digital cash scheme by David Chaum, and is there a new implementation planned by anyone?
The problem with things like that is that you have to have a central server to do the reissuance of tokens. And any centralized system like that, you have two problems. You have the bootstrap problem, chicken and egg, that faces every social network or currency system or communication system. You have to have the users there first. And there's no incentive to spawn adoption. With Bitcoin, it had the inflation system to get people into it, get people working on it right away. Blinded tokens and Chaumian cash systems don't have that in general. The second thing is that they're centralized. The centralization will kill any digital cash system that reaches any level of popularity, such as we're seeing with Liberty Reserve. They will get shut down, whether it's legally, extra legally, or in some black op when all the people just disappear. Like if you threaten the government financial systems, they will stop you one way or another.
The final question is from a member of the audience.
Yeah, hi. This is not a technical question,
Certainly.
but I mean, I don't know much about money markets, but you mentioned that the supply of bitcoins is limited. So my question is, once the supply starts to run out, won't the system go into deflation because it might become more profitable to hoard bitcoins? I mean, have you thought about these kinds of, well, more...
Absolutely. Deflation is a concern of a lot of people, but I think a much larger evil is inflation, which is what we're seeing with almost every major world currency right now. This coin is denominated in dollars, was worth $1,500 a few months ago. It's worth $1,750 today because we're seeing massive inflation all over the world. Bitcoin in that way is analogous to gold, in that there's a fixed amount of it. There's a certain amount that we as humans have in coins, and there's a fixed amount of it spread out in the Earth's crust. And we dig it up and refine it and make it into coins, but there's only so much of it. And I'm a firm believer in the free market and allowing people to determine what their own money is worth in the marketplace. Set prices what you want. Don't pay them if they're too high. And the deflationary worries, I don't think are actually going to end up being practical issues in the Bitcoin world. If anything, what it means is that your money just sitting on your computer won't be losing value like it is if it's dollars or euro in a bank account.
Okay, thanks. Unfortunately, that's all the time we got. Thank again our speaker, Jeffrey.
Thank you, everyone.
Our next talk will be an audio feature. Be sure to not miss it. Also, if you leave the room, please have a look under your seats, to the right, to the left, and take all things with you that aren't supposed to be there. Thanks. Make our life a bit easier.